Thank you, George. Coming up on tonight's South Today. Taking the slow train, emergency timetables in place as railway embankments dry out and shrink.
You can't see it with the naked eye, but the drying, cracking clay beneath the tracks is trying to move the railway lines.
With hundreds of thousands of journeys affected, we look at the science behind it and the solutions, also in tonight's programme. Attracting attention for the wrong reason. HMS Prince of Wales anchored for inspection off the Hampshire coast.
We're live from Bournemouth, reacting to the news that head coach Scott Parker has been sacked.
And losing weight but gaining friends, the Slimmers Football Club on the Isle of Wight. Good evening, I'm Anjana Gadgil. Passengers using services on one of the region's main railway lines are about to experience the direct impact climate change is having here in the south. Speed limits will be cut and services reduced on trains between Salisbury and Exeter because drought conditions have dried out the clay embankments beneath the tracks. It's led to shrinking as they dry and movement to the rails. An emergency timetable will be announced on Friday. Network Rail says hundreds of miles of line across the south faces a similar risk. Our transport correspondent Paul Clifton reports.
Crawling westwards between Salisbury and Exeter. The trains on this section of track near Gillingham are restricted to 40 miles an hour. Normally they do 90. You can't see it with the naked eye, but the drying, cracking clay beneath the tracks is trying to move the railway lines.
We've had the driest July since 1936, and we've had a really sharp rise in that desiccation or the drying out of our embankment. So it is a real challenge. We could intervene, sooner rather than later. But the issue is that if we made any repairs to the track, it won't last long because the soil has not yet reached the limit at which it'll dry out. So it's continuing to dry for the next few weeks. So we can only really intervene in a safe manner when that has stopped happening.
Arriving late from Tisbury. Because this is a single track with few passing loops, each train running late in one direction makes every train in the other direction late too. So an emergency timetable is being introduced. Network Rail won't give a precise end date, but it's likely to continue for 2 months.
It will mean that there are fewer trains running between Exeter and Salisbury, and these trains will take longer than normal. The timetable that South Western Rail will be running will mean that there's one train every 2 hours to Exeter and one train every hour to Yeovil.
That will disrupt hundreds of thousands of journeys.
The fact is, over the last 2 weeks, over 50% of their services on this line between Salisbury and Exeter have been late. We haven't had any infrastructure improvements on the line between Salisbury and Exeter for over 10 years, but no real major work to make the line more resilient. A lot of the people travel for leisure. They don't have to travel. They can use their cars. And if they don't have through services or if services are cut back, it's very likely that it will force people away from the railway and into their cars.
There are thousands of similar clay structures on the railway across southern England, perhaps 600 miles in all. Network Rail reckons to find a permanent fix to all of them would cost 15 to 20 billion pounds and take decades, a figure so large it would never happen. In a changing climate, this means the railway faces a monumental long-term challenge, for which it really does not yet have a solution. Paul Clifton, BBC South Today, on the West of England line.
At the University of Southampton, engineers at the National Infrastructure Laboratory are already studying what happens as the clay embankments dry out. Professor William Powrie explained the science behind it to Paul Clifton.
What happens with the clay is that when water dries, when it dries out, the water comes out of the pores, it goes into suction, that suction pulls the grains closer together and the whole lot shrinks.
So what does that mean for the railway on top of the embankment?
You could be looking at shrinkage of easily 100 millimetres or so. We've measured 100 millimetres in some of these embankments under less extreme weather conditions that we've recently seen. So your nice level railway line ends up all disturbed.
There are hundreds of miles of clay embankment on the railways across the south of England. What are the implications in a changing climate?
It is a major problem because we are going to expect to see, over the course of a year, larger variations in the water content of the clay between the winter and the summer. And that means that the infrastructure operator is going to have to deal with changes in the movement of the embankment, changes in the level of the railway line, and really think about how can we cope with that without wrecking the operation of the railway.
That sounds like it will be enormously expensive and take years to put right.
So it is potentially both. We can do model tests to start to understand the mechanisms and also to do some elements of prediction about how bad the problem will be. Realistically, it is certainly tens or hundreds of millions and years of work, but I think that there are things that we can look at to try to reduce the impacts, and that is the subject of a programme of research which we are beginning to work on with Network Rail.
William Powrie speaking to Paul there.